start our recording. That way we have everything recorded, and any folks who missed anything can go back and take a look at whatever on our website. And I'll send out a little email after just with a follow-up. And then later today, everyone should be getting the email invite for the conference as well, which is about 2 weeks away. A little closer to the date than I would have hoped, but things are a little jam-packed right now. But we should have a pretty good turnout because I've communicated the details of the conference to some other locality folks, like technical folks. So we'll have a lot of people like that on there. I know last year we had a pretty good turnout. We had over 50 people. So, you know, honestly, anything even greater than 30 is a great turnout, I think, for a conference. So I did send the preliminary agenda
Yes.
before, but there will be a little bit of an update to it. But we have Laura Cattell-Knoll. She's from the Alliance for the Bay. And I had a great conversation with her the other day, but she's going to send me a little blurb that I can pass on to you guys so you know what her presentation is about. But essentially, as a local government projects manager, she has access to all these modules, you know, on everything from what is a TMDL to how can local elected officials benefit their watershed. So she's going to select something that she thinks is applicable, maybe a combination of modules, and then present that. So she'll be our first presentation for the conference, and followed by, as usual, we do a little update on the corridor plan. We'll be doing an update on the rural corridor plan. That's on our agenda. That's we are slowly beginning to work on the scope for, as well as the annual WIP update that I do, and a nice Q&A after. So it'll be a good conference agenda, and I think we'll have some great discussions. But if folks are ready, I'm happy to jump right into our board meeting agenda and catch up. It's been a while.
Thank you.
So I hope folks are doing well. As we know, this meeting is our annual board meeting. And coming up, as you know, we have our 6th annual conference for the RRBC. But I'm happy to just dive into our first agenda item. If anyone has any questions or comments before that, I'd be happy to open the floor.
Charge on.
Awesome. So starting off with our urban corridor plan for the Ravana River, Sandy's just going to do a little overview of just how the project is going, what the draft plan is looking like, and all that. And we have a good chunk of time dedicated to that. So please feel free afterward to ask questions and all sorts of stuff, because now would be the time to do that. As a conference, I try to keep things, as you know, a little bit out of the weeds for folks who aren't as technical. So if there are any technical questions now, feel free to throw them on us. But I'll let Sandy take it away.
I actually have a question about it. I noticed, I haven't checked out the very latest Charlottesville Comprehensive Plan, but I did notice in the latest Charlottesville Comprehensive Plan, they'd zoned the area in Pantops along the Ravana River as high density development. And I was just wondering, is that going to be addressed in the urban corridor plan or not? I mean, part of the area they included as high density development was floodplain.
Yeah, so the plan itself actually did not address land use specifically. So the underlying assumption that this entire plan was built around is that the land use had already been determined and would not be evaluated as part of this process. That said, you know, I think we do mention, you know, just generally making sure that there is environmental sensitivity around development, that development is going to not have negative impacts on the environmental characteristics and qualities of the river. The steering committee was very specific that was very important to them to make sure that was prioritized. So while we don't address the land use specifically, I think this plan does provide a lot of support to making sure that there aren't detrimental impacts of development on the river.
Are there policy recommendations to move that any by right density away from the river? For example, transfer of development rights I know that that's been a recommendation of the Natural Heritage Committee in Albemarle County, is to use transfer development rights to remove some of that density immediately adjacent to the river elsewhere in the growth area and or city.
That's not part of the plan recommendations. It's certainly something we could bring back again to the staffs of those committees. But I think the challenge here again, like I said, is this plan was intentionally not intended to address the land use and the specific types of development. And I think the challenge is that we were in a process where the comprehensive plan was being developed. So I think this plan would generally support that, but as far as specific recommendations, that's not included. Like I said, it's certainly a conversation. I'll be happy to take any feedback we get from you all, though, back to you know, the staff that I've been working with as part of the technical committee in order to discuss whether or not they feel like there's a place for that in this plan.
Thanks, Lonnie. That's a great question. Sandy, whenever you're ready, you're welcome to.
Yeah, I'll go through and I'll try to keep this really high level. I know several of you have sat in on some of these presentations, and so this will be more of a review for you than others, but please stop me at any point if you have questions, and I'll just ask Dominique and maybe Anne to keep an eye and to let me know if there are any questions that pop up, because I won't see them while I'm in the presentation mode.
I think a great way to do this is if folks have questions while you're speaking, to put them in the chat, and then we can go back after and address them in order as well as you know, verbal comments as well. But I think
sure,
that would be great.
So just as a high level overview for those of you who maybe aren't as familiar with this planning initiative, is this urban river corridor plan is a joint effort between Albemarle County and the city of Charlottesville. It was originally envisioned as being 3 phases. The first one was completed in 2018, and that was an assessment of the existing conditions. And then this is phase 2 that we're getting pretty close to wrapping up right now, which is the visioning phase. Originally, when this project was conceived of, there was also an intention to pursue a phase 3, which would be a master plan for their urban corridor. Given the phase 3 is not a commitment at this point, there would need to be some additional conversations with Albemarle and Charlottesville if they would like to commit to moving that forward. But this is basically a policy document that would guide the development of a master plan to put actual projects for implementation on paper and start prioritizing capital projects at that point.
Could I ask a question at this point?
Sure, yeah.
If the decision is made to go to phase 3, how is that to be funded?
That would need to be a commitment between the city of Charlottesville and Albemarle County. They would have to identify resources to move that forward.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. The phase 2 study area is basically looking at the urbanized section of the corridor. And so it starts at the north terminus at Penn Park, and then it runs down basically to I-64 and included the properties on both sides of the river. This is a little bit more of a condensed geographical boundary compared to the first phase. The first phase was 13 miles. This one was a little bit more contained at 4 miles. This is just a general timeline to show how we've been working on this. We kicked the project off in July of 2019, started working on updating some of the information that we had completed as part of phase 1, and started getting some ducks in a row in order to start with the public engagement and outreach. And of course, as you all know, we got hit with the COVID pandemic, which made us kind of have to go back and rethink how we were going to do that engagement. In August of 2020, we were able to complete that final outreach strategy. We completed a series of public outreach efforts. We've been working on the plan drafting, and now we're in a process where we're getting basically the final document in the revision, trying to incorporate feedback from a variety of sources, during those final sort of back and forth discussions with technical committee members, feedback from the public and other groups that we've identified that we need to do additional outreach for. So we're pretty close to having a final plan in place to move forward for consideration of adoption. Again, we had to re-envision our public engagement process in light of COVID. So we really relied on our website, and some of you all, if you traveled the urban section of the corridor, may have seen that we had put informational signs up along the river corridor to direct people to our website and give them opportunities to make sure they were able to comment on their project or on their priorities for the river. We held a couple of public webinars in October. We also, while not, yeah.
Yeah,
No, go ahead.
9:30.
Oh, not a comment for us. Also, while not technically a part of this project, we were also working on a feasibility study for a bridge crossing, a bike and pedestrian bridge crossing in the Pantops and Woolen Mills area that was in the same area as this corridor study. So we also leveraged some of the focus and attention we were getting both from that project to help make sure people had opportunities to speak to the corridor plan development process, and vice versa, to make sure that we also made sure that people who cared about the corridor plan also knew that there was this other feasibility study that was being conducted, and made sure they had opportunities to be engaged there. And then the other thing that we did was we held some called stakeholder group meetings. We had developed a list of different priorities that we focused on, developing recommendations within those priority areas. And so we met with some of the subject matter experts that were either members of the technical committee to have more specific discussions, or maybe had some level of expertise outside of the technical committee members, like public safety personnel and the Ravana Conservation Alliance, and people who had expertise in historic preservation, those kinds of stakeholders, in order to get some of their feedback and give them an opportunity to guide some of the recommendations development. And then most recently, we met with the Charlottesville Planning Commission in August. So from the website,
really quick, do you mind?
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, to that end, and given Lonnie's question earlier, did the comprehensive plan come up as a discussion and what we should be seeing on our land use during that engagement? I'm sorry, I'm just not familiar with what scope you guys covered with the Planning Commission.
No, we basically gave a very condensed update of this, but we did get a little bit of comment back specifically around affordable housing, related to wanting to promote affordable housing. So we did add some language a little bit later in the recommendations. I can point that out to you. We did add some language to make sure that we're supporting affordable housing, and we added the language specifically to be consistent with the land use development of the localities, to try to make sure that it was clear that these plans should tie together and shouldn't necessarily, usurp each other.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Did you reference at all the Biodiversity Action Plan for Omaha County and are using the data from the National Heritage Committee? I know that corridor, particularly the urban corridor, actually has several what we call biodiversity hotspots or spots or special sites. I provided a GIS later in the past to you all. I don't know if that was used at all.
I'll be honest, I wasn't involved in the mapping, but what we did was we let the localities identify to us where their prioritization efforts were for things like restoration or stabilization or things like that. So we more generally reference major areas. I think what you're talking about, Lonnie, may be more appropriate for a phase 3. And one of the recommendations that we have, that I have identified as one of the priorities that should be moved forward, is to do a full assessment and really identify where the high priority areas for conservation and protection areas and for environmental considerations.
I mean, we have just off the top of my head at least one site of a species occurrence that occurs nowhere else in Amarillo or Charlottesville. So I mean, those kinds of occurrences, and we have several occurrences of species that are rare in the county, like Clematis ochroluca. And so I think it'd be important to recognize, and also the habitats themselves, the river bluff community is referenced specifically in the biodiversity action plan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I think
oh, go ahead.
I would say it's very important to really use the available materials right now rather than pushing it down the road to some future study, because this is 20 years worth of work to gather this information, and there's no reason why you all should do it again, even in phase 3. So these things do not survive. These do not survive when they're not recognized before the development happens, because the bulldozer will take care of them right away. And I think Heather and her staff can decide how they want to address housing in the floodplain. I mean, there's a lot of discussion nationally about how housing for low-income people has been put in the places that get deluged over and over and over again, including in Houston after Harvey. So, and maybe happening again today with the hurricane today. So let's not miss an opportunity to at least be aware of these things and try to bring them out of their silos whenever we can. Thanks.
Sure, understood. I'll make a note to see if, just to follow up and to see what the information that we have is based on and whether that has already been part of the consideration.
This is Jason. I'll just echo what Lonnie and Ann said. I know I'm new to this group, but I'm not new to the river and the issues. I've been working on it for 26 years. So I would hope that this document would have a little more oomph to it if the city and the county paid for it and want recommendations coming out. And I'm happy to try to work with the existing framework and draft and the committees to maybe augment here and there to help the city and the county know where they should not. We should be highlighting specific places that are very important.
Mm-hmm. I'm just jotting a note down to myself. So as you can see, and it sounds like you all are in the same mindset as the people that were responding, based on the types of comments that we got from the website, there was a lot of concern about the environment. Everybody identified that really the environmental preservation was going to be the most important factor to consider as part of this plan update. I'm so sorry, I don't know how to mute my phone. As far as the public webinars, between the two public webinars that we held, we had 44 people that attended total. And one of the things that we did was we asked the participants to provide feedback on the high level of what we called guiding principles, as well as the vision statement that we had developed. And we got some feedback on the vision statement, and I'll share the updated vision statement in just a minute. But the main feedback that we got is that we needed to make sure that we communicated a more active stewardship role of protecting the natural environment. So not just making sure nothing bad happens to the river, but how can we actively improve the health of the river overall? And then we also needed to work out between some of the conflicting uses that were identified as priorities for the area. So things like promoting additional recreational activities might impact the other goals of making sure that we provide a serene, peaceful, natural environment for people to enjoy. So we had to go back and do some work on that related to the vision statement. But in general, we had about 88% agreement. And you can see with the guiding principles, we identified the high-level guiding principles were related to recreational activities, public safety measures, historic places and cultural features, environmental protection, trails and bridges through the area, landscaping and buffering, and then development and redevelopment. And you can see that the agreement rates were pretty high for most of them. The ones that had the most highest levels of disagreements were things like related to things like new development or things that the public saw could have negative impacts on the environmental quality of the river. And so again, we really tried to make sure that we were emphasizing when we developed recommendations that we were not changing the recommendations for development from what had already been identified as appropriate development in the localities, locally adopted plans. And then also making sure that we emphasize in any of those recommendations that were related to anything that could have a negative impact, that we wanted to make sure that any development or redevelopment or recreational activities were done with a mind towards environmental sensitivity. So based on those guiding principles that we had developed, we had those stakeholder committee meetings, like I mentioned before. And so we had basically one meeting for each of those topic areas. We also completed some benchmarking, looking at plans from other localities that had undergone a river corridor process, and just use that as an opportunity to make sure we weren't missing any major factors that we should consider, and just get some better ideas for opportunities that we could incorporate into our planning process. And so we started with Richmond and Greenville. Those had a lot of attention. Those were brought up over and over. And then we also considered Lynchburg and Fredericksburg. And you can see these are some of the common themes were just related to importance of trails, fostering an appreciation and understanding of the local history, and then making sure that the plan was done in a way that fostered stronger connections to the water for people who were using the corridor. The vision statement that we ended up landing on is that the Ravana River, which flows through Charlottesville and Albemarle, is one of the community's greatest assets. The river corridor is and will be a dynamic place where people can experience a natural environment, healthy outdoor activities and venues, peaceful and serene opportunities, and important historic and cultural points of interest. So this is the vision statement that included that feedback we got from the public. And I already ran through these, but these were the main guiding principles. So these were the main factors that we discussed as far as developing recommendations within those. If you look in the plan document, we actually updated the plan to incorporate the recommendations. But what we did was we developed this, this general matrix, which shows the recommendation, and then if there were sub opportunities underneath each of the recommendations, those were also shown below. The environmental protection just didn't have any sub bullets that needed to be considered at this point. We identified the category, who was going to be responsible, and then a general time frame and fiscal impacts. These are really just sort of a best estimate as to whether or not we think that this will likely be a big financial commitment, should it be pursued, or a smaller financial commitment. So I'll go through the high level recommendations in more detail. And again, if you want to look at everything more specifically, that's going to be in the last section of the plan document. And I put a link in the chat so you can go and look through that if you want to. But for example, to answer your question earlier, Lonnie, you know, the very first recommendation under environmental protection is this: identify and protect the most sensitive biological and ecological areas. One of the things we also did in the plan was, while we didn't specifically reference these per each recommendation, is we did develop a list of other related plans that should be referenced. And I also want to make sure that you all know that we did have the Charlottesville and Albemarle, I guess it's Public Works. Crystal was part of the discussion for Charlottesville, and then Kim Bassioli from Albemarle was part of the discussion representing the environmental priorities for the county and the city. So both of them were able to provide feedback into developing those recommendations. So they were not done without some effort to collaborate across all of those really important county and city departments.
Yeah, I was going to recommend that you talk to Kim if you didn't already, but it is important to note, I don't know about Charlottesville, but Albemarle has we have GIS data about special sites. And so we have very detailed information about where natural resources are. And I would hope that that's incorporated. On this other thing in here that I think is important, particularly as you move into the urban section, there's several brownfield sites along the river. Thinking particularly of Cosner's and some other places. where EPA funding for restoration may apply. And I hope you incorporate, and I would encourage you to reach out to David Slutsky maybe, because he actually, he teaches a class on this. But, just surfing briefly, the EPA has a whole page on grants for brownfield sites. And so working with landowners to, and to help apply for grants and get some of those places cleaned up would be great.
Thank you. Yeah, the
I would
grants. Oh, go ahead.
I would just jump in to say, I really encourage you to strengthen number one, because identify means we haven't done the work yet. And I think we need to jump straight to protecting the already identified places, because otherwise it'll be another 20 years before we do anything. So please think about that. Also in the county, there in 1980, west of 29 was a 100-foot buffer for structures was passed. And in 2010, we had a 100-foot buffer on the eastern side. So there are no buildings allowed in the 100-foot buffer in the county. And so I want you to be aware of that, so that you're not erroneously saying that those kinds of things can go forward in the county, and the city will have to figure out what their wording is going to be. Thanks.
John, no sound. Any other feedback?
I just extend the invitation as well to the city. We have representatives of the city here, that even though the Natural Heritage Committee has been is specific to the county, we do have information on city sites as well. And if the city would like information on any that, I would love to see the city do what the county has done in terms of have a inventory of their biodiversity and their assets that are located within the city. And I'd be glad, I'm sure our committee would be glad to help provide the information that we already have.
I'll reach out to you, Lonnie.
That would be great. And I wouldn't mind just being kept in the loop. I'm just being conscious of capacity, but if Jason's willing to take the lead, I wouldn't mind being in the loop, and I'll keep Michael in the loop. Thank you.
Great.
All right. The next session is related to recreational activities. So one of the most important things that we identified is that it's really important to have a strong trail network. And we wanted to make sure that we were also emphasizing access and making sure we were making access as easy as possible to as broad of a community as we could. So I don't recall if it comes up here or maybe later when we're talking about the transportation network more specifically. But one of the things we really wanted to emphasize is that we wanted to build connections to places that might be underserved, and also make sure that we were improving the modal access as much as possible for the entire community to really truly make this a regionally accessible point of attraction for as broad of a community as possible. That was something that came up several times over the course of this project. Was we want to make sure that the entire community, not just those who live in close proximity, really are able to enjoy and appreciate this asset.
Could I ask a question at this point?
Yeah, sure.
You had a slide up previously that indicated that there could be some tension between better access to the river and the desire to maintain the natural character of the river. And in that case, I hope the natural character of the river wins over access. Because I think it is true that there are a lot of people in all 5 of the jurisdictions the river flows through who are unaware of the river and its beauty and its importance. But nonetheless, even in improving access to the river, I hope that we are not going to in any way relegate the importance of the natural setting of the river to access. That's the point. I guess I'm not making a question, I'm making a statement. Thanks.
Yeah, understood. And if you read through, I agree there is a tension, and I think it's going to be consistently a balancing act to figure out how can we do this in a way that doesn't undermine the environmental quality of not just the river itself, but also the important habitats and the other ecological systems throughout the corridor. But it was very clear in that plan, and we tried very strongly to emphasize as you read through it, that if environmental protection is going to be a priority, it has to be the top priority and the first thing that's considered before anything else can be done. So again, we want to provide the opportunities to improve recreation, to improve access, but also with a really strong lens to looking at that through how can we do this in a way that doesn't that maintains the characteristics and the qualities that make people want to come to the river in the first place.
Maybe a little specific, but one thing I'd really love to see is a sign that talks about some of the sensitive natural communities, like the river bluff habitats, has examples of species that occur there, and that could educate the community about some of these natural communities that occur along the river. Because I think a lot of people don't even, talk about plant blindness. A lot of people just walk out in the forest and see a whole bunch of green, and they don't understand that one patch of green is very different from another patch of green. And when people are aware of those communities, I think that they'll, that'll translate in people wanting to protect those as development occurs.
Yeah, so you'll see actually, not in that exact wording, but under number 6 in that environmental protection, that came up as well in our conversation, is to promote stewardship, awareness, appreciation, and education through interpretive and informational signage and other programming types of opportunities. So yeah, I think that is really important. The more people understand, the more likely they are to want to actively engage in the protection. Any other comments?
Yeah, this is Tony. I was, kind of going to add along really two things.
Yeah.
One is if you browse the web, and first of all, I think your report is excellent so far, and really informational and very helpful to get an overview of the history and the direction that we want to go. So kudos to the group that's worked so hard on this. But second is really, if you go out and you look on the web for different information regarding how to access, and I'm talking along both recreation and highlighting the nature, both in terms of animal life and plant life. There's obviously the Ravana Conservation Alliance. There's the efforts being done by us here, and there's Ravana Trails, but there's not a real connected sort of map that would provide a highlight of really the recreations that you can do, the kayak trails, kayaking, canoeing trails that you can do, the distances, all those kinds of things. And I think that would be an important aspect of kind of creating both a map, trail map, canoe and kayak map as well, and having that published in sort of a consolidated way in conjunction with these other groups. And along with those lines is, as you know, Fluvanna borders Albemarle and the Ravana, and it also has seen a significant increase in activity on the river as well too. And we certainly would want to be part of that informational process there, and providing that all to folks, because we want, of course, to encourage folks to visit Ravana as well as Albemarle and Charlottesville.
Sure.
Fluvanna, I'm sorry.
Thank you. I will butt in to say that it's a spectacular idea and will help all jurisdictions to be finishing the funding for, we have 5 put-ins that are in the capital plan for development. Each one is pretty small, but together they make a lot of money. We just haven't done them yet. And Buck Island Park right there on the Fluvanna border is one of those 5 that we need to do our homework and get our work done down there.
Absolutely. And moving from
Tony,
Buck Island, ultimately, I'm sorry, and I didn't mean to step on you there, but moving from Buck Island through Fluvanna and down into Scottsville, really lots of opportunities there. And Fluvanna is trying to identify points where we can, provide additional access to the river, because there are some pretty long trails, kayaking trails involved there. And it can take, 4 to 6 hours, depending on the trail that you're taking.
That's spectacular.
Highland and Bath County have a Allegheny Blueways map that's fabulous. I can share that with the group. It's a regional tourism map, exactly what you're talking about, Tony.
Excellent.
And it's a wonderful way to connect all the communities in the watershed. It's really for the Upper James, Upper Jackson, the cow pasture, etc. It's great, and I've used it many times.
Absolutely. Thank you. That would be great.
Yeah, I've seen those maps. They're good.
Yeah, that's a really helpful suggestion. Any other thoughts before I move on? All right, so then we started talking about the multi-purpose trails and bridges, and one of the things we wanted to mention is just that we would continue to support efforts to identify the bicycle and pedestrian bridge connection between Woolen Mills and Pantops. So we're working on that one specifically right now as part of a smart scale application. And then there were two other crossing locations that were identified as being of interest. That would be between Penn Park and Garden Toe Park, and then Free Bridge. And then again, as part of this discussion, we wanted to make sure that anything that is pursued related to additional infrastructure would consider the visual impacts, parking impacts, maintaining the scenic river designation, and of course, the other environmental preservation and conservation types factors. We wanted to also talk about promoting the use of trails and bridges for commuting traffic, which would also hopefully help reduce demand for parking in the nearby facilities, so people would become more accustomed to getting on a bike or walking to the park and using that to get to the parks, in addition to also just reducing reliance on vehicles as part of their commute trips. We talked a lot about wayfinding systems. How can we make it easier for people to navigate a trail system? So not quite as comprehensively as what you suggested, Tony, but I think that that's probably right in line with what we were thinking, and we just didn't have imaginations to expand as far as you suggested. There were also a lot of conversations about the types of trail surfaces, and it became pretty clear that some people are more comfortable on different types of trails. There's not one type of trail that more comfortably accommodates people with limited mobility. So for example, some people found the hard surface trails to be easier because maybe they could push a stroller or a wheelchair or something like that along the trails. But other people who didn't necessarily need to rely on support devices commented that having soft trails was also really important. It was maybe a little bit easier on their joints and things like that. So it became really important that we make sure that there is a variety of trail surfaces that people can access, and also that they know which trails are which, to make sure that if they did have a specific need that needed to be accommodated, they would know how to do that without having to show up and find out in person. So that became really important to make sure that we were doing a better job of information sharing in that way.
Yeah, amen on that to the trail surfaces. That's very important.
Good. And then we also talked about talking a little bit more about some of these regional efforts. There's been a recent push to have a 3-notch trail identified, which would basically provide a cross-regional trail connection from the Capitol Trail starting in Richmond, potentially going through our region, and perhaps even going into Stanton. So we just wanted to make sure that we were also acknowledging that there was some momentum around this, and that we were providing support for that initiative. Any other questions or comments on the multi-purpose trails or bridges before I go to the next section? All right, so then we talk about public safety, health, and welfare. And really what happened as part of this discussion is once we started talking to the public safety personnel, it became really clear that we didn't necessarily want to, this started with a much different tone in place as far as, finding alternative locations for the homeless population and things like that, and really moved towards how can we empower people to feel safe and informed and know how to engage with any sort of public safety considerations on the trail proactively. And so this moved more from we need to deal with certain very specific problems to let's inform equip our corridor users to know how to respond appropriately. So that became, so this section became a lot more about how can we improve collaboration with some of our agency partners to make sure that people know who to respond to if they have some sort of safety or health concern. Let's make sure that if there are additional safety measures that are needed in certain places, so things like putting railings up on the stairs going down to the river access areas or things like that. Like let's focus on those actual safety issues. And then let's make sure that we're sharing information so people know who to contact and how to get in touch with people that can help them if they do have some sort of public safety or health issue that needs to be resolved.
One thing you might want to think about is access to water. I had a bad incident one time. I underestimated how hot it was outside, and I was on a run with some friends. And quickly, I started to get heat exhaustion. And luckily, I happened to be, the person I was running with happened to be a nurse who lived nearby, so I was able to go to her house. But if I wasn't running with someone who lived in Charlottesville, I could have very easily ended up into an emergency situation. And part of that was we were running on a city trail, and there wasn't an obvious place to access water.
That's a really good point. Any other?
Along kind of sort of the same lines, and I know it's part of the trail map, but as you said, there's some popular swimming holes where folks are. And, I don't know whether some additional safety measures can be taken there and identifying those swimming holes where it's safe and maybe in that map that's ultimately done where the river depth is dangerous. I mean, obviously a river depth of 4 or 5 feet can be dangerous depending on the person, but there are some areas where maybe the river depth is higher and more subject to rapid currents. So that would certainly be something that we might want to consider putting into the map and identifying and on the trail where appropriate.
No, it's even.
No, we have to keep the rope swing secret, okay? No maps of where the rope swings are, because I don't want people getting there.
Yes, rope swings are secret.
I think one of our problems is that too many people go to the web to find out about some of the swimming holes and then leave their beer cans and diapers behind when they go. So that's been a major problem out at Sugar Hollow. That's for sure. Yeah.
Trash cans and all that kind of good stuff, and maybe even maps. I'm sorry, flags.
Yeah, and we have a way of issuing bacterial. I know that the Ravana Conservation Alliance has in the past issued bacterial warnings. Is there a way to clearly communicate people to people users of the river when bacteria levels are high?
I don't know if there is currently, but that certainly came up if you look in this section where they have more details.
Well, one of the things that we do at the lake is we have flags that sort of designate different conditions. And so that's certainly a way to do it as well too. And sometimes when bacteria due to sewage spillage happens there, they'll cordon off those beaches. So that's a great point as well too.
Mm-hmm. All right. So we'll move on to development and redevelopment. And one important thing that really needed to be emphasized is that I think it's in Albemarle County and Charlottesville as well, is that most of the areas that can be developed already are. There might be a few where there are some additional opportunities to develop new properties that aren't currently developed, but really the emphasis is going to be on redevelopment and how to make sure that as properties are redeveloped, it supports kind of the overall goals and aesthetic and experience of being on the river. So that's where a lot of this is really intended to provide some guidance and some support if there's going to be any sort of future discussion about how to better implement redevelopment and development initiatives. So we talked about making sure that businesses that are along the river are oriented towards the river to help promote sort of the river as being part of the experience of visiting those businesses. So like a restaurant with a deck that oversees the river or something like that is a good option to really just help make sure that the river is the emphasis of those development efforts. And they're all intended to have some sort of, I hate to use this word, but synergy together to support a larger goal of appreciation of the river. And then also looking at promoting incentives for landscaping, using things like industrial art to beautify existing commercial and industrial sites and adding visual interest. One suggestion that came up a little bit later was to encourage the shared use of stormwater management facilities to try to get returns to scale on that and be as efficient as possible, but while also still protecting the water quality in the area. And then this last recommendation, number 9, was the one that we added after speaking with the Charlottesville Planning Commission, which is the affordable housing is to be encouraged to be located with close proximity to the river corridor, supported by robust transportation access and conformance with locally adopted land use plans. Any questions on this section or comments?
I would just sort of second, I think Anne had expressed some concerns about number 9 and making sure that we're not encouraging people to build homes in floodplains, that could end up being its own environmental injustice issue.
Sure.
Otherwise, some other really good things in there. I'm glad the encouragement to use native plants. I know that there's a great, Omaha County has put together a great native plant database. There's also a regional native plant effort. There's the plant Northern Piedmont Natives has a whole campaign around native plants. So that's another good thing to tie into.
I haven't heard anything about angling and fishing, and it's a strong community on the Ravana. It's a great smallmouth fishery, and if someday some of the there's gizzard shad, but if someday the river herring and American shad come back, it'll be once again a great herring and shad fishery. Was that brought up by any of the folks you talked to?
I think we did have some discussion. I'm looking in the recreational activities. There were some discussion about fishing. It wasn't a major, necessarily a major consideration. I can't remember if it is referenced in some of the sub recommendations or not. I'll have to look at it, but we could certainly add it in there if it's not already.
All right, I'll try to be more specific and in line with your format if I want to suggest something. What is the time frame for dealing with this draft? I'm sorry, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, basically we've made a lot of presentations. So I think it's in a pretty, at least like format wise, it's in a pretty close final format, but it hasn't gone through any public hearing processes yet for adoption. So I'm waiting there are a couple more things I want to make sure that we do to reach out and get some feedback on. So I would just say if in the next week or two, if you could email me any sort of suggestions, that would be really helpful. And I can make sure that those are considered for inclusion.
One other thing that occurs to me too is I don't know if any of the localities have adopted them. I don't think so. But there is the ability through the Chesapeake Bay Act to adopt what are called resource management areas as opposed to resource protection areas. And one of the things that are required in resource management areas is low impact development. There may be other parts of the code, enabled part of the code that allow us to implement low impact development. One of the big problems is there aren't a whole lot of tools for, maybe the localities can provide incentives towards low impact development, but currently, once you authorize something to be built, nutrient trading allows people to trade off a lot of the things that, we can't stop people from nutrient trading. And that means that they may build something where that stormwater is not mitigated on site. So without something that requires explicitly low impact development, it's not going to happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know if this is something that's been discussed with the localities or not, but I would be happy to take those back to their staffs to see if they have any sort of, feedback on whether that's something that they have considered implementing at this point, or if there are reasons they haven't.
May I just make a recommendation to you? Tanya Dinkler at the Institute for Environmental Negotiation has done a series of studies of low impact on the eastern shore of Maryland, on the shore of the Chesapeake Bay. So they have experience about advising local jurisdictions about how to develop low impact housing or industrial facilities or parks along a river or a bay system. So I would recommend you might want to contact Tanya about some of the developments they did that have very low impact.
All right, thank
That's
you.
ex-
Thank you for the resource.
That's excellent. If anyone finds that, I'd love to see it.
All right, I think this is the last one as far as, and I just want to be mindful of the time to make sure we have plenty of time to discuss the other items on the agenda. But the last guiding principle was related to historic places and cultural features. And again, this has gone through some back and forth, but really we realized that there isn't already a comprehensive inventory of historic and cultural resources. And that really needs to be the starting point, because then we can identify which of these maybe are sensitive and need to be protected and can't be open to the public. And where are the opportunities to maybe improve access to the public for some of these environmental or historic resources or cultural resources, that we can help foster a stronger connection between visitors to the river corridor and the local history of what has happened along the corridor and how it has come to be where it is now, as well as really making sure that we're partnering with local organizations to improve awareness and education, to hold historically focused events, to partner with the Monacan Indian Nation. Well, really not really to partner with them, but to support the initiatives that they are moving forward, and to make sure that we provide better community engagement to acknowledge and recognize their very important history in the area. And then again, just to make sure that we are doing all of this in a way that makes the historic features sort of a seamless character or quality that gets tucked into the rest of the I don't want to say development of the corridor, but the rest of the sort of identity of that corridor, to make sure that that is considered upfront. Any questions or comments on this section?
I would like to make a recommendation. The Monacan Indians, I read a book about them recently. One of their most important burial mounds was on the land of Monticello, just above the floodplain of the Ravana. It's a very, very important relic of that, not only the Monacan civilization, but Native American civilization in this area of Virginia overall. So that would be a site that you may not want to point out to people in terms of getting to it, but at least include it in your inventory of sites along the Ravana that have important relationships with the Monacan Indians.
Certainly. Thank you for mentioning that.
One thing I've always wanted to see in a region is a pawpaw festival. I think it's such an important cultural resource, in a sense that they used to have pawpaw custard pie used to be served at lock houses along the Ravana. It was an important food source. You talk to old timers in Virginia, they'll talk about going to the river to gather pawpaws and what an important resource that was. I think it's changed in recent years. I think now most people know what pawpaws are, or at least I hope they do. But certainly when I was growing up, I didn't even know what a pawpaw was, and I lived in this area. But that'd be a great combination of historical and cultural something that could be provided.
Yeah, one other thing I'll mention that is interesting is, at least on the city side, I'm not sure in the county, I believe that their local regulations, it could be in the county as well, actually prevent like or limit some of these kinds of festival activities because they don't allow things like food trucks along the river corridor area right now. So that's something else that might need to be part of the discussion is, and I believe it's mentioned, I'm not sure in which section it was, but I believe it was mentioned, just looking at some of those zoning practices that might prevent some of these larger, more fun events that might attract a lot of people from being able to be implemented at the moment. I would go to a pop-up festival there. I think that sounds fun. Any other comments on this section?
I'll just say that this goes back to what Tony and Marvin have been saying about connectivity to the north at Greene County and to the south. The Canals and Navigation Society has in the past been way more active than they are today. And there is this buried history. I know Steve Pullinger clears out Broken Island Lock all the time, but there is a buried history along this river that, whether it's native history or settler history, and the injustices related to enslaved people, that history should be brought forth. And I know it's in here, but I think we could strengthen it maybe a little bit more. A lot of work has been done in the past, and if you haven't seen some of it, it's impressive.
Sure. You guys are teeing us up nicely to transition into the next presentation today. Well, just to wrap up the plan, I know this text is kind of small, but this is in the last page of the plan right now. We identified our some very specific priorities. So they were broken up into planning priorities, grant application priorities, and project priorities. So the planning priorities are kind of the where do we need to get more information to set us up well in order to take the next steps to identify specific project priorities. So the planning priorities are really intended to move forward a master plan if a master plan ends up being pursued. These are all practices or planning processes that could go through that could feed nicely into it, but could also be very valuable in and of themselves if that master plan process does not move forward. So again, like we discussed, it includes creating a comprehensive inventory of the biological and ecological areas, building on obviously what's already been done, but really making sure that we have that not just for one locality, but for both localities, and can identify those priority areas.
There's a great tool called iNaturalist that we should really be promoting, particularly in parks, that helps create citizen science data on environmental features. Plants, animals. It's called iNaturalist.
iNaturalist, okay.
And it's a project that was created. It's a nonprofit project that was created with the help of the Nature Conservancy.
Okay.
And so it's very, if people, we can get people out there, master naturalists, recording iNat observations, then we can help use that data to help drive things, particularly in other counties like Ravana, where they may not have committees or groups within the county. They're specifically working on biodiversity.
That's great. Thank you. I did not know about that resource. Yeah, so that could be one tool that we use to support not just protecting the sensitive areas we already know about, but continuing to identify the ones that need to be protected. Creating a comprehensive inventory, like we talked about, of the historic and cultural resources. This came up a couple of times, is conducting a viewshed analysis, both from the perspective being on the river and overlooking the river, just to make sure that we're preserving, again, that's more about preserving the experience of being on the river, but it will also help us determine what the appropriate scale is for potential development or redevelopment that is being considered along the river, those kinds of things. So this could be a really valuable asset to make sure that we protect the scenic properties of the river, and also making sure that we scale development appropriately. And then also really determining if we want to take more of a proactive role in developing design standards. The next step for that would need to be to conduct some sort of architectural analysis or design charrette to start identifying what those aspects of the design standards should be for development within the corridor. The next section is really looking at grant application priorities, and I think this probably could be strengthened just because I certainly have some knowledge gaps in these areas. But you know, making sure that we're taking advantage of the resources we have through grants to pursue some of the initiatives that have been identified, like transportation system improvements through both VDOT and also the recreational trails program, which is not necessarily need to be, you know, commuter supported transportation options. There's a little bit more flexibility with that. Looking at environmental conservation and mitigation grant opportunities in collaboration with local partners. There's some new funding that's available for flood prevention that we could pursue, as well as historic preservation types of grants. And then this last section is really identifying out of the list of projects that we've identified that are more discrete, which ones do we think will have the biggest impact while also maybe utilizing you know, resources most efficiently. So we've really focused this the project prioritization on things like making sure that existing facilities are flood-proofed, reviewing policies to identify barriers or opportunities to support recommendations, provide user information on trails and accessibility through signage and online information, identify where additional safety measures are needed and implement those, provide emergency contact information, and install and maintain rope railings. So those were the initial projects that we thought we're going to undertake discrete projects. These are the kind of the easy wins, the ones that don't require a whole lot of resources that we know that we can accomplish that we think will make a big difference. And then finally, like we had talked about before, if there's a phase 3 that's moved forward, that would be the development of a master plan. So that's really looking at how do we put some of these implementation ideas on the ground for the bigger projects. So looking at preservation, capital investment, private investment, river restoration, and really prioritizing where resources should go and what those kinds of financial commitments as well as funding opportunities might be to implement some of those more on the ground capital improvements. Like we talked about before, we would need to determine whether or not there was financial commitment from Charlottesville and Albemarle. That would be the first step. Then we would develop a scope of work. Either the TJPDC could be involved, or this could be something that the localities end up pursuing on their own. And then it would move forward to the selection and retention of a consultant to develop that plan. And ultimately that would result in a master plan with specific implementation schedules and funding opportunities.
I just have a question about that.
Yeah.
I have great respect and confidence in the JPDC staff. I'm not sure why you would need to hire a consultant when you probably could do it in-house, or am I wrong there?
Yeah, this would probably more likely be, I mean, I think there's certainly some things that the PDC could support, like the public engagement parts of it, but ultimately a master plan would be something that needs to be prepared by engineers or landscape architects or people with more specific technical expertise, which unfortunately, I appreciate your confidence in us, but I don't think we would be able to provide that service, unfortunately. All right, so that concludes. I know we're a little bit over time, but I think you guys had some really good feedback. If anybody, I'll also drop this in the chat just so it's easier for you all to access it. But if you need to reach me, there's my contact information is right there. With that, any other comments before we move on?
Thank you, Sandy. Every time I hear this, I learn more things, and it's getting better and better every time. So I'm really
thank you.
grateful for all that. And the 3-notch trail will make progress in 2022 because the state's going to take over the railroad right of way. So we have a real chance to get somewhere on that as well.
That's exciting.
Yeah, it is.
Michael Payne and They just jumped on, so we have 2 new people. Welcome to the call. We're just finishing up
Hi,
our
Bea.
Hi,
overview.
Ann.
We're just finishing up our overview of the urban portion of the draft Ravana River corridor plan. And now we're actually, if there aren't any more questions, I'm happy to transition into the rural portion that we just started working on the scope for. If there are any more questions, I want to make sure everyone's gotten all their comments and questions out.
No, I'm going to call up Ann later and find out what she said about the railroad.
Let's do the recording. That'll take care of it. But anyway, that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll talk later.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So
And I
will go-
apologize for being late, but I think I had a doctor's appointment and just got back. So,
Of course. And that's why we do record it, is,
yeah.
life happens, and that's the great part of these Zoom meetings. So I will go ahead and share my screen. One moment. Alrighty, are folks seeing the Ravana River Corridor Plan document? Okay, just want to make sure I'm not showing you my calendar. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the scope we have. So Sandy and myself have actually just begun the process of really delving into the rural scope and figuring out how we can undertake the initial research efforts before we form what would be a technical advisory group. And I want to apologize in advance. I did provide these materials in the packet, but some of them do have smaller fonts. So if you're struggling to read it on my screen, that email has the PDF, so you can zoom in a little bit. But I primarily wanted to, because there isn't a ton for us to discuss right now because we are in the initial stages, but I did want to share with the board where we are within the scope. So I will go ahead and scroll down. So for task 1 within project management, Sandy and I are, we initially went in, we reviewed the scope, we discussed the budget. We were setting up monthly meetings to make sure our budgets for this particular plan, everything is being dealt with in that regard. So those kind of initial meetings, sorry, kind of talk in circles there, but those sort of initial meetings have been taken care of, just overviewing the scope and budget. But right now, what Sandy and I are really focused on is document review and analysis. There are obviously portions up here, like meeting with stakeholders. That hasn't happened yet, but meeting with the RRBC, meeting with colleagues, doing the scope and budget, those things have been accomplished. But within task 2, right now, what I've been working on, and you can see it within the document, it's a table that looks like this. This table right here on page 4 and 5. Sorry about jumping around. That's us beginning to review policies and comprehensive plans and things pertaining to the Ravana River, as well as just creating, which that is an analysis matrix of existing initiatives, recommendations. So if you take a look at the document, they're sorted by county, Albemarle County, Green, and Fluvanna, as well as other plans and existing Ravana projects. That research is still continuing. But if you take a look, you can see all the different comprehensive plans, strategic plans, community surveys that we included. And we sort of took all of those major themes and we broke them out, and we found common threads between all of these plans, between the localities. And this, we're going to continue doing this research, but I did want to share with the board where we are right now. A vast majority of the county research has been done, and now I'm going to be delving into other plans that exist. One that Sandy passed on to me that I've been starting to look at is the Reedy River Master Plan. Sandy, is that North or South Carolina?
That's South Carolina.
Okay, just want to make sure I had the right one. As well as the Regional Rivers Plan in Virginia and the Middle James River Plan, which are all great examples for rural locations. So when that research is continued, we'll be happy, or completed, we'll be happy to pass that on. But right now we're really just trying to find commonalities between all of these comprehensive plans that exist in our region and outside of our region, because there's always something to learn from other states. But that process is happening right now, just doing our review and document analysis. And then depending on the outcome of that, we will then proceed on to creating a technical stakeholder advisory group. And there is a list in the document. Let me scroll down a little bit more. This list right here in the document just kind of shows where our thinking is with regard to departments and individuals in the county's RCA staff, soil and water, and other businesses that we'd like to be involved in on the stakeholder group. And you can see there's some common themes here: Parks and Rec, economic development, planning, environmental related departments. And we just want to make sure all those folks' voices are included. Yes, Anne.
Yeah, you might, under Ravana, I
I was
think
just-
you ought to include the Department of Community Development, which is responsible for planning.
Thank you. Anne?
When I first looked at this, I saw erosion and sediment control in other counties, but not ours, but we still have a huge problem with it. But if that's included in, I mean, maybe a separate listing of water resources manager or something under, or planning, maybe you've incorporated it in planning and environment, but I just, when I saw that Green had that as their top list, I went, wait a minute, that's ours too. It's a
Yeah.
huge problem we have. So make sure you don't lose track of that. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think within Green, you know, other department names are just a little bit different. And I think because Albemarle has so much within planning environment, I just figured I'd group it all together. But yeah, we have water resources folks, some names that probably come to mind and are very familiar that everyone is working with. So we definitely want to include all of those folks. But just, we wanted to just sort of share our preliminary research with the board and let them know what direction we're heading in with the rural corridor plan. Sandy, was there anything you wanted to add?
No, I think right now what we're trying to do is get as much of the baseline information in place as possible. And then we want to reach out to the stakeholder list as identified here, let them look over you know, our background information, tell us what we missed, because I'm sure there will be some things that we missed or, you know, need better refinement. And then we'll start working from there, moving into the next steps. The other parts of the plan that we're going to be undertaking is what's referred to as a I forget a systems analysis, I think, which is really looking at what are the initiatives outside of the local county you know, initiatives through their planning efforts and their environmental programs and things like that. What are the other things that are happening around the river, the programming wise, that maybe are being conducted by state agencies or volunteer groups or nonprofits or things like that. And so really we're going to have a really robust understanding of what the priorities and initiatives are and what the current capacity is as far as addressing some of those, and start identifying what next steps can be from those analyses.
To be honest, this was intended to be a shorter portion of our agenda, so we have a lot of time for questions before moving on to the next section, if anyone wants to raise their hand. Well, if there aren't any questions or concerns, we will be continuing to update the RRBC on what is going on with the rural plan, and I'll be involved in that, so you'll be seeing communication from myself and Sandy. But if there aren't, yeah.
Is the RRBC a stakeholder? Automatically, because that will facilitate getting all of these people watching out right away. And it's always faster if we're watching out at the beginning than if we try to catch up at the end.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, you are certainly a stakeholder, yes. As far as participating, I think there are two types of meetings that we're thinking. One of them is going to be more of a technical committee meeting. So as Dominique discussed, that the idea would be probably to work mostly more with staff on, you know, more of the specific documents, but we do have scoped into here regular additional meetings with the RRBC to review some of the information as it comes about. So you'll probably be hearing from us to schedule one or two more of these meetings throughout the year in order to be able to share that information and get feedback.
I think that's the major charge that the RRBC has, is to share information, to gather support for things, and also for each locality to give direction to their staff. That's what the electeds are supposed to do. And so it's wasting your time to go ask staff when they haven't gotten any direction from their electeds yet. And all that may change. So just put that into your stew pot, because earlier is always better. As I told my kids when they were 13, I'm going to find out. And if I find out from somebody else, it's not going to be good for you. So
Sure.
Well,
Fair.
one thing I'll mention, I think I mentioned at meetings in the past, is there's a great case study of how things can be done right in Emerald. We're not perfect, but on Polo Grounds Road, there's a case of a rare habitat, a vernal pool habitat, with a county rare salamander called the spotted salamander that migrates every year across the road. And when a development project was proposed off of Polo Grounds Road with Riverbend Development, it could have gone very badly, but instead the county worked with the developer, and the developer actually offered to put salamander tunnels under Polo Grounds Road. We had volunteers out there every year, like carrying salamanders across the road before that. And the salamander tunnels are now in place. And we've actually documented that the salamanders are using the tunnels under the road now. And the developer has also set aside critical habitat for the salamanders as part of their plan. And this is along the Ravana. So this is a great example of a case study of how things can be done well. And so it'd be great to highlight that.
Despite the detrimental effects of the construction, or potential detrimental effects, it's still a very cute story. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, I mean, would we all rather the construction never happened? Sure, but we did show that there are still salamanders there, and they're crossing under. So, that's some success.
well, actually, the scientists determined that the 400 feet north of Polo Grounds Road in the forest was the prime habitat, and that has not been touched. So that is a huge set aside. When I talked to the developer originally, I said, I have a win for you. Are you ready? And he was ready right at the beginning. So that was, they're very encouraged by their success.
Thank you guys for that. That was a nice little highlight to our board meeting, is to have something nice and cheery. If there aren't any more comments or questions, which we're happy to answer, we can move on to the next section on our WIP contract. All right, keep on trucking. So that within the agenda, we're just moving on to our third section, and I'll continue to share my screen and go to once again to the WIP contract. But once again, I do want to apologize for the small font. I attempt to fit everything on one page, so it can be a little bit difficult to view at times. But I will zoom out all the way so folks can see which document I'm referring to within the packet. And this is the listed out deliverables for our Chesapeake Bay watershed plan with DEQ. Folks who were on this call previously, or on our last board meeting call, and our conference will recall me talking about this contract, as well as anyone who's been in on some other meetings. But this is my baby. I'll start off by saying that the WIP contract has been something I've been working on since I started at the PDC. And it does align, obviously, with Governor Northam's 2025 TMDL, or environmental talks and goals, however you want to phrase it. But next year, I know our contract will involve a lot of community involvement, given that COVID kind of prevented us from doing that this year and toward the end of the 2020 contract as well. But we have about 10 minutes left on our call, and I think that's the perfect amount of time for me to do a quick overview. I don't want to get too into the weeds, and I'll do a nice high level overview. So if you take a look at this chart, you'll notice that there are sections: activity 1, 2, 3, and 4. Sorry about the scrolling. So there are different sections, and each has different intentions. The first section being, facilitating implementation of the plan within our localities and our region. The second portion of the plan focuses on implementation of best management practices for the reduction of nitrogen and phosphorus output in our bodies of water. And then in the third section, this is a section that will be submitting for the coming year's contract. We'll be submitting to DEQ based on conversations I've gathered with our technical folks in the localities. And this is something we write up. So there are regionally specific initiatives or programmatic actions that we've actually gone in and determined were important for our locality. And so every PDC that has this contract, this portion for them is a little bit different. And you may notice, very specific goals, like working with National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. This would be a great example. Dale, you might actually be aware of this, but we were working with Alan Yost from the Greene County Visitor Center, and they applied for a grant, a small watershed grant with the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation to work on a revitalization project for their visitor center. So really implementing some new BMP strategies. I know they want to put in a rain garden, all sorts of things. Just all different sorts of pavements and other drainage systems that they don't have available right now at their visitor center. So that'll be a really great, I like to call it a BMP attraction. It's always nice to see folks taking that initiative and taking advantage of the funding.
Was that a VCAP project?
I don't believe so. I believe that it was a project that they were just hoping to take on and then needed funding for. And the PDC was originally going to apply on behalf of them, but we learned based on some conversations, it might have been a little better for them to do it and then have the PDC as a partner or fiscal agent. But I don't believe it was through VCAP. But
It was a NIFWIF grant, you said. So.
yes, NIFWIF grant, yeah, small watershed grant. But like sections like here down at the bottom, I really want to focus on this regionally specific section because the portions above are really just continuing meetings, updating our commissioners, continuing to use social media, and you can take a closer look at this within your packet. Sharing information with localities, hosting this meeting is a part of the WIP contract. RRBC kind of acts like a steering committee in some ways to kind of orient our Ravana related goals and our watershed goals. But what I really focus on in the contract, because I know all those other things, they'll be completed, they'll happen. But what I'm really focused on is making sure we assist our localities and our local groups with applying for grants when they need assistance, as well as making sure that those grants are passed on and folks are aware. And I'm communicating with Ann Coates from Soil and Water. Lonnie, you may have been on a few of the emails, but I've emailed her, updating her on grants and funding that comes out, and Ann's always passing legislative research that they have our way. So
I haven't necessarily seen that, but that's great. Glad to hear that communication's going on.
A big part for me when I started the PDC of me working on this subcontract was making sure that our relationships with the environmental departments in our localities and our soil and water conservation districts were solid. And I did notice that the PDC wasn't coordinating and communicating as much with soil and water, or Thomas Jefferson Soil and Water, as I had hoped we were. And so I really made a point of opening up that communication, especially through groups like the Ravana Stormwater Education Partnership. If folks remember from our last meeting, I did talk about a Love Your Watershed program we do with RCEP, that group I just mentioned. So those kind of things get lumped into our contract as well. And we make sure to track all of that and make sure DEQ knows what other private groups are doing as well, or not private, excuse me, nonprofit groups. Sorry about that.
My question is, you talked about nitrogen and phosphorus, but what about sediment?
And
Because
sediment
we know that
reduction.
Sediment is the biggest problem Albemarle has.
Absolutely.
And so I would hope that you will find a way to put that word out there every possible chance.
Absolutely. It is definitely there in that list.
We're working hard in our legislative program to try to get approval from the legislature to have some very minimum standards for agriculture and forestry. And I don't know if we'll succeed at all. Other jurisdictions on the call here, please consider joining in because we're not talking about putting people out of business, but you can't keep doing work the same way you did in 1929. That's why we had the Dust Bowl. So we've just got to do better than we are right now.
Yeah, and I'm very disappointed with the state in this regard because someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that they've dropped sediment as one of their goals. that they're going to be focusing on phosphorus. Yeah, I think that they were looking at their metrics and they decided, well, sediment is too difficult, so they just dropped it.
Well, that's a result of the fiasco of the working group on the Chesapeake Act that just got to be too hard, so they just stopped doing it, and it's just pathetic.
I mean, it seems to me backwards. Instead of saying we should, the lack of progress on sediment says we should put more resources to it, not drop it.
Yeah.
But that just very frustrating.
Well, it also is an ethical, moral issue because Albemarle, I mean, Green is so small that we're probably not getting cream too badly from Green, but Fluvanna is getting cream from Albemarle and the things that we're not doing right. And so we have got to do better as the bigger geography and also the bigger distance on the river and the fact that Fluvanna did better to begin with. So we've got catching up to do big time in our county, and I really hope we will get there. But you have to think carefully about your stakeholders and whether people are actually going to be contributors or they're just going to say no. Because you don't have time in your life to spend all your life with people who are just going to say no anyway. Thank you.
Dominique, do you have an existing list just summarizing the grants that you've helped with or received as part of the WIP? I don't want to ask to make work. I just want, if there's an existing summary of the grants you've worked on or received.
I have yet to compile it, but I essentially, around the interim submission date in June and then the final submission in December, usually about a few weeks before I start compiling everything. But I will say I have an email folder called grants, and they've all been clicked and dragged into there and shared with other people. So I'd be happy to compile it and send it to you, but I wasn't planning to until around our submission. But I'd be happy to. Yeah, it's just really a continual process of forwarding on emails and just I have like a, much like our RRBC conference invite list. I just have a big chunk of people and I go, whoop, and then every once in a while one will get rejected and I'll figure out who replaced them and add it to the list. Folks, very familiar names like Greg Harper, Laura Williamson, Crystal Riddlevold, folks we know from the county and city that I'm familiar with, folks like that, not to leave out our other localities. But if it is any consolation and it does make folks feel a little better, I know that new legislation was passed in the special session to create more punitive laws for contractors. I can get the specific bill number, but contractors who continually break the rules, break BMP rules, continually, not BMP rules, sorry, let me rephrase that, continually break environmental ordinances. And as we know, oftentimes these contractors choose to break the rules and then pay fines after the fact. But now there is a new system put in place. I believe it's your third fine. There is some legal action. I believe it's a civil penalty is taken against the contractor or the company. I know that's something that's going to be occurring in the new legislative year. So kind of cracking the whip a little on these contractors who've continued to build within our localities and are not following the designated rules that are taking on, all of these environmental concerns into that.
When you come across that bill number and any information regarding that, would you please send that to everybody on the board? Because this process we have of ask for forgiveness rather than permission, and also calling all these expenses as, $100 fine is nothing on a $30 million project. And if it can save them 5 days of bulldozer work to just do all the work on Sunday when nobody's looking, the destruction that is happening is awful. And we do not have right now, according to our legal people, the ability to get after them. So if we have authority that we didn't know about, I would really like to know. Thank you.
I was just looking at the bill about a month ago for David, and I was quite interested in it and all the environmental related bills that come my way. I don't know if some folks know a dual part of my job, or I have a dual job, and the other part is being a lobbyist and legislative aide for the PDC. And so we're always keeping an eye on legislation that's coming out, and it always piques my interest when I see something like that, because I know there have been complaints for a long time about that. But I'll wrap it up here because I want to make sure taking into account everyone's busy schedule. But I'll let folks, I didn't want to do too much of an in-depth overview of this. I want to let folks go through and read it themselves and take time to see what we've accomplished. But I will say right now, the contract is technically complete. If we wanted to fully submit right now, we have checked off our minimum boxes, but the PDC goes above and beyond. So we're going to keep on trucking and keep on doing things, keep on hosting meetings. There's a stream cleanup coming that Ravana Conservation Alliance is hosting. I believe it was from Lisa Wittenborn, the email I received. So we have a lot of stuff coming up, and we're just going to be continuing to add to the contract. But everything from updating our hazard mitigation plan. The last time we did the plan was 2018, so an update is coming, a 5-year update that we're beginning to work on now, or quite deep into working on. Things like that are included as well. So the SWIP contract is really all encompassing. But I'll leave it at that because we are at our mark. But if there are any questions, concerns, fire away, and you'll have my email as well, and I'll be passing on these materials in an email later today.
You know, one thing I've asked for years is I'd love to see TJPDC or someone produce a menu of enabled legislation that localities can use for water protection. You know, I think it's a big challenge for localities to know what their options are. You know, so I think just having those, like, you know, particularly categorized, you know, so if someone's interested, for example, in low impact development, what is the enabled legislation that allows them to do that? Or stream buffers, what is that? And I think that'd be really helpful to elected leaders to know what their options are.
That's a great point. That is absolutely a great point. And that's something I can discuss with David, because that's right up my alley. I'm a planner and legislative aide, so can do both at once, whatever you guys need. And I noticed you had your hand up.
Yes, thank you. Before we run, there was some confusion about citizen reps. And I know Lonnie started out as a citizen rep and then moved to the Soil and Water Conservation District citizen rep for Albemarle. But I thought Jason was ours, but he says he's the city's. So I just wanted to clarify so I knew who to chase on what was going on here.
Yeah, your spot's vacant, and you guys need to fill
Okay,
it.
then we will work on that. We thought you were ours, so we were being lackadaisical here. That's fine.
And I was always representing the district. I was never
okay.
assisting that.
All right, I was confused. I guess you were treasurer. Maybe that's where I got confused. I'm easily confused these days. But anyway, we will work, B and I will work on that to find somebody to represent the county in the citizen spot.
Great. I was just taking a look at our list here as well. And I do, I know Greene County no longer has a appointed citizen. I did reach out to the clerk, and I have yet to hear anything. And I know things were a bit hectic last year. But I'll reach out again and see if there's someone they'd like to appoint.
I'll follow up with that for you. That's no worries.
Thank you, Dale. I appreciate it. You know, we have folks from all localities who participate heavily in this group and all of our Ravana related efforts. So I'm not too concerned about getting the word out and making sure our elected officials know. But if there aren't any other questions, happy to answer them. But if not,
Thank you very much.
absolutely.
Look forward to the conference, Dominique. Well done.
Thank you. And you'll be
Thank
getting an
you.
email today with all these materials and the invite, and yeah. My
Take
son
care.
to a nice
Thank you,
morning.
and
That's
Thank
great
you.
job. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
Take
Thank
care.
you. Bye.
bye.